Good morning, afternoon or evening friends and fellow YouTubers. Now, following repeated requests to do a setup tour video, here it finally is. I'll begin by looking back at what I had in 2005, then forward in time to what I have at the time of uploading this video in 2023 and why the change. I will then run through all the gear, including all the software which I use for my video editing and music creation, and finally on why I consider my setup to be largely incomplete. I will pause the video, allowing my viewers and subscribers to comment on where I should go from here before showing my thoughts at the end, indicating also what future videos you can expect. Okay, so this was the setup I'd built between 1999 and 2005 in a smaller back room when I was still living in Ickenham. Now, what you don't actually see in the photo, over here there would be a digital piano, a second computer screen monitor, an HD multi-track recorder and a few other bits of digital gear as well. And here above the photo, sitting on a shelf, would be two Genelec 2029A digital monitor speakers. In 1999, this all started as just a venture in collecting keyboards from different brands after hearing how the Christina Aguilera song Genie in a Bottle was made. So at the top here we see a Roland XP60, which was my first purchase in 1999, and this was supplemented with a Yamaha PSR 640, which was then replaced by this 9000 Pro, which I bought the following year. It was around about this time when I was influenced by a recording studio I visited whilst doing backing tracks for a duo that I decided I needed something to record them on, so finally ended up with the Korg D1600, and at the same time I got this Novation Supernova 2 virtual analog synthesizer. And it was around about this time I decided to go down the rack gear and computer route after further influences, this time from visiting several Sound Expo expositions in Wembley. I wanted proper screens, not just titchy little monochrome ones, and I was inspired by seeing what computers could do with projects to really make them sound organic, such as automating any parameter I had in my channel strips. More gear accumulated, such as these MIDI controllers and secondary speaker monitors, until I finally decided it was complete in 2005. And all I can say now is that at least I've made back the money which I spent on it, but not much else. Let's just say that as the following years resumed into the next decade, tech evolved and became cheaper, and I finally realised there was no point wasting room space by keeping gear, most of which would show its limitations in a decade or two. This, in stark contrast, is the minimalist setup I have at this time. Let's just go through what you see here in order of the signal chain. This is where all my musical data goes in from, the Kawai VPC-1. This was launched in 2013 with no successor as a controller keyboard with the components and action of a real grand piano, and this is reflected in the price. It's more expensive than some entry-level digital pianos with actual built-in sounds. I bought this in 2021 by selling other items, including a Yamaha CLP 470 with which it replaced. On the one hand, I needed a piano that sat well with certain classical pieces, but on the other, I was financially unable to splash out on new gear. So this was a no-brainer decision, replacing the CLP 470 with another sleek instrument with just one button this time, where I'm still paying somewhat of a premium for the key action alone, which however was all I needed. I didn't need onboard sound since I'd always kept up to date with those inside my computer without any limitations. So although I paid over £1,000 for a controller keyboard alone, it's still the cheapest way with which I can stay up to date with dedicated piano software whilst using the same great piano action to play it on, and we'll see short demos of this later on. Suffice it to say, I'm very happy with the action, build and the way with which it blends with the rest of the setup appropriately for classical music videos. At present, this is my main source of audio input, a Samson G-Track USB condenser microphone. This is what you're hearing right now with added effects to enhance my voice, and it's used for all my speaking videos except where I need to attach the mic about my person to enable me to speak even when I'm moving around, typically when I need to demonstrate things at the keyboard, and for those, this Rode mic clips to my shirt and cable to my smartphone. Let's now go to the computer where all this audio information is going, and let's start by looking at the specs of this machine. You will notice that this is a late 2015 iMac. Now obviously with my present situation as described in the video description, I can't afford to upgrade any of my setup, but by around next year when hopefully I can, it will just about be time for me to upgrade with either a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio with an M Standard Pro, Max or Ultra CPU, while this iMac may be used as a primary or secondary monitor whilst also providing extra storage. It was supported to run the latest operating system until 2022, which was the year before this video was uploaded, and it's still good to go for the latest versions of all the major software which I use on a regular basis. In this video I'll just outline the main apps or programs I use for my YouTube videos, and more detail will be provided in a future video. At the moment I use Telestream ScreenFlow for all my video editing, as I have been comfortable to use over the last decade, though at some point I will only use it to edit my screen capture and recording projects, while my video recording will be edited with a proper non-linear editor. My main digital audio workstation of choice since 2002 has been Logic Pro, when it was first supported in OS X, while it was still being developed by eMagic shortly before Apple bought it. Since then, Logic came in a single studio-in-a-box package comprising over 70 gigs of orchestral, instrumental and synthesizer samples and loops included, but as with any digital audio workstation, there are always going to be requirements for more dedicated sample libraries driven by this powerful sequencer. And since I am a pianist, you'd expect me to have a few dedicated piano libraries, and these are the 3 superb ones which I use now. Synthogy Ivory 2, which I bought over 10 years ago, always my go-to instrument when I want to set or imitate a vintage classical recording, such as those made by Rubinstein, Arau, or even some late 19th and early 20th century recordings. In contrast, here I have the VSL Synchron D274, standard version only, and this is my latest purchase. This has the most detail and the most number of samples out of all 3, and therefore I tend to use this to record the most virtuosic classical pieces which demand it. And then there's Spectrasonics Keyscape for all the other musical genres, such as rock, soundtrack, sing-along, and even the odd few classical pieces, as well as genres that require other types of keyboard instrument. One of the future upgrades to my home setup is to get up-to-date versions of all the other Spectrasonics instruments which I've had, but in the meantime I also have Cube and Air from Lunacy Audio, and I'll go through a walkthrough of this unique software instrument in a future video, but if I may, for the next 2.5 minutes I'd like to just play through a few of the presets which I think sound absolutely stunning. And finally, all audio goes through my Isotope Ozone mastering software. Again, not the latest version, but all in good time, hopefully next year or at the very latest in 2025. Finally, these are my Genelec or Genelec M030 monitor speakers, which I have set up to play audio directly from the computer via a 3.5mm headphone jack. As yet, no audio interface is needed, though this may well change as I add more to my setup later. Now, these monitors were introduced in 2013 and discontinued 6 years later. Let's just have a look at the back of one of these units. So, apart from the audio mains ports and power switch, there are 3 switches, each with 3 fixed positions for volume, bass and EQ attenuation, and this is used only for the benefit of sound compensation and treatment when placing the monitors close to walls or in the corner of a room. The rest, things like volume and parametric EQ settings, are mixed internally from inside the computer. After all, the main purpose of a studio monitor is to produce as near to a flat response as possible. We're actually looking at the back of my living room at the moment. Over here we can see my glass table, a few lovely flowers on there, a few pictures, poster on the wall. We go on to the other side, of course, there's another one over there. It's my Yamaha P45 in the corner there. And if we just walk forward a little bit, so we can see my 2 spotlights which I use for my video recording. They're unbranded, as indeed is the camera stand. I did have another light that was sold to me, but I haven't got around to using it yet. Anyway, so let's walk forward a little bit. This is my main working area. Here we see my IKEA shelf units, housing all sorts of things, music books. If we look down here, this is where all my setup is plugged into. It's a mains conditioner, spent about £200 on that years ago. Still works very well. There's all of my Spectrasonics instruments. And now we'll just go to the setup here. So you can see I've put the Kawai VPC1 digital piano beneath the table, so the keyboard itself is closer to me than eventually where the MIDI controllers are going to go. I mean, if you think about it, that's the traditional layout you'd have of a digital piano, organ or a synthesizer, where you'd have the musical keyboard below, all the sliders, knobs and switches. It's also in the best position for a classical pianist to be able to play it, therefore, and I'll demonstrate why. I can think of no better illustration than the very famous opening of the first piano concerto by Tchaikovsky. We have the orchestra that starts at which point the piano comes in with its chords that go up and down the keyboard, and the orchestra goes dee-dum-da-dum. Now, do you see the way my torso is actually moving? Let's just take a look at that again. If I were to do that with the keyboard resting on here, for example, I would be literally falling off my chair, and it wouldn't do my back much good. So after considering several options, I think this is the most suitable and logical position for my use. And of course, everyone's going to have their preferred layouts depending on what they do. This minimalist setup works just fine for me to record piano solos, but while possible to do other types of recording and mixing projects, it is far from complete. But rather than discussing this aloud and taking up more storage space, I'm instead going to just remain quiet for a few seconds, during which I invite my audience to pause the video before you jot your ideas down in the comments section about what can be done to complete this setup and where I can go from here. These few seconds will then be followed by a text visual display of my thoughts, and that's all they are. No right or wrong answers, just thoughts, opinions, and I'll be very interested to read those of others below in the comments. And that's it, so short conclusion. For my uses, I'm very happy with the layout, but lots more to add to this setup, which should be done by 2024 or at the latest 2025. Cheers folks, have a good evening.